Now you may think that we've removed every single obstacle to exporting a model from Blender to Unity and that everything should work fine now, but that's not quite true. There is one obstacle remaining to us that is going to cause us problems, and to demonstrate this I've created this Blender file here called navigator.blend. You will find this in the course companion files if you want to follow along. It has this kind of pointy nose and an arrow pointing upwards. I'm now going to export this file by choosing File, Export and Autodesk FBX, and I'm going to save this as nav.fbx and leave all these settings at their defaults. We've seen these settings before. I'm going to choose Export FBX like so, and then just jump over to Unity and import this file and just see what happens. So here I am in Unity. You can see we've got our editor folder with the necessary script in there to set the FBX scale. Let's bring in a Windows Explorer window, select the nav.fbx mesh, drag and drop that into the project panel, and let's see what happens. Here we have our nav mesh, and you can see if I expand this, we've got some problems. You will see that this cube mesh here, we have the upwards pointing arrow, the forwards pointing arrow, but this mesh appears to be rotated. In Blender, we had one of these arrows pointing upwards and one of them pointing forwards. So that really is not right at all. It should have been something like that. And you can see here on this mesh that we do have an arrow pointing upwards and an arrow pointing forwards, which is correct. But if I look at the default settings for this mesh, you can see that a rotation of 270 degrees has been applied on the x-axis. And if I drag and drop this into the scene, you'll see that the forward pointing arrow in the Z direction has nothing on it at all. And the forward pointing arrow here is not aligned to the axis at all. So this really should be looking the other way. So that is not right. This object has been rotated, and the reason is because in Unity the y-axis is up and in Blender the z-axis is up. So the coordinate system has been rotated. So in the next video we're going to be looking at how we can solve this issue by going back to Blender. So in this movie I want to show you how we can configure and export our models in Blender to align with the Unity coordinate space. We know in Blender that we have a Z-oriented coordinate system, meaning that Z is up and Z, according to the coordinate display, is the blue axis. And in Unity, the up axis is the Y axis. So we need to configure our model to be oriented to the Unity-based system here. So I'm going to open up the Object Properties tab by pressing on this plus icon to display the transformation properties here for this object. So the first thing we need to do with this object is to we know that Y, which is the green axis, is up in Unity, and that the Z axis here is forwards. So we need to rotate this model to align with that space. So on the X axis, I'm going to rotate the model by -90, and on the Y axis, I'm also going to rotate by -90. And now you can see the up of this model, the up arrow is pointing in line with the y-axis, and the forwards of the model here, the forwards arrow, is pointing in line with the z-axis. Now before we go ahead and do anything else, we've got these rotation properties set in here, and I want to bake these into the model. I do that by choosing Object, Apply, and I choose Rotation. And that will reset the rotation back to 0, but the model stays oriented how it is. Then I want to export the model. I'm going to make sure the model is selected here in the viewport and choose File and Export and Autodesk FBX. And I'm going to scroll down, and in the FBX properties, make sure we have them all at their usual settings that we've applied. So Mesh, Selected Object is enabled, and Apply Modifiers. And for the forwards axis, I want to make sure that this says Y forward, and for up, I want to make sure that we have Z up. And then I'm going to export nav.fbx, and that has exported the model with the correct settings. I'm now going to jump over to Unity and import this model. So I'm back here in Unity with our editor folder with the FBX script inside, and let's import our exported model, which is nav.fbx. I have this here in the Windows Explorer view. I'm going to drag and drop that into the project panel here, and just move the Windows Explorer window out of the way, you can see from the project panel that right now this model is aligned just as we want it. We have the top arrow pointing upwards, the forward one pointing to the front here. That's looking pretty good. And if I expand the mesh properties here, you can see that these two objects, the mesh data itself, aligns with our mesh object. So that's good. These two coordinate systems align. And if I scroll down further in the object inspector, you can see that the rotation for this object is 0, 0, 0, which means that no rotation is being applied. That means that the coordinate system of this object and the coordinate system of Unity will align. We can even prove that in the viewport. I'm going to drag and drop my mesh into the scene and set its position to the world space origin here. And I'm just going to press F on the keyboard to frame my model. And right now we have the global coordinate system specified. And you can see here that Z is forwards, then Y is up, and X is sort of coming out to the side. But when I change to the local coordinate space, there's no change in these axes at all. And that is because the global and the local coordinate spaces coincide with one another, and that's a good thing. So we're now in a position to export our models to the FBX format. And we're going to be applying everything we've seen so far to the models in our environment set, and I will do that in the next video. So now I've opened up the Blender file that contains all of the pieces for our modular environment. And what I want to do here is show you the complete workflow for exporting one piece from Blender to Unity. And that workflow will apply to all of the other pieces in the set, so that you then know how to export all of the pieces into Unity. So really the workflow I'm applying to this piece is just what we've seen before. So let's take a look at how this works. The first thing I want to do is to mark all the sharp edges in this mesh. So I'm going to press the Tab key on the keyboard, and we can see all of our edges. Now you can see the seams marked in red, but right now we have no sharp edges marked. So I'm going to change the mesh display from textured to solid. So I'm going to select the solid view here, not textured but solid. And now I'm going to make sure I'm in edge mode and start selecting the sharp edges. So we know we're going to have one sharp edge over here at the bottom where the floor meets the wall. So I'm going to select that long edge there and choose Mesh, Edges, and mark Sharp, and that's painted in blue to indicate that that is a sharp edge. We're also going to have a sharp set of edges around here because this is an area where the surface changes direction. So that also is going to be sharp, so I'm going to select Mark Sharp there. Again, we're going to have some sharp edges along here and along here, and as well we're going to have sharp edge there and there, so that's going to be Mesh, Edges, Mark Sharp. And I'm going to move further up, and again we're going to have another set of sharp edges at the top of the model here. So let's just select that edge, and I'll come over and select this one and this one. Notice we're not selecting that one in the middle because that's part of the complete surface. It blends with this entire surface up here. So I'm going to choose Mesh, Edges, and Mark Sharp. And I'm also going to do the same for the top here. So this edge, and choose Mesh, Edges, Mark Sharp. Now we also have the edges at the side on these pillar pieces here as well. So we're going to have an edge here, one here. We've already marked that one, so another edge there, another edge there. Let's move up a bit further and take a look at what we've got here. We're going to have another edge there, there, and there, as well as that edge. And just going to zoom out and take a look at what we've got here. We've got another edge here, 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 and yes, that's fine. That should be correct. Mesh, Edges, Mark Sharp. So another sharp edge there. That's looking pretty good, so everything's marked out there. Let's take a look on the other side, and we're basically going to do the same thing. So I'm going to mark out that edge, that edge, that edge, this one, this one, this one, and another edge here, and again another edge there. Actually, did we mark the top edge on this side? Yes, we did, so that's okay. So I'm going to come further down and select this edge and this edge. Make sure we select all the edges necessary. So again, I think we've managed to select all the edges there. That's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go Mesh, Edges, and mark sharp. So what I've done in here, I've just now marked out all the sharp edges for our model. So that's looking pretty good. We need to go to the next step, which is getting this ready to export to FBX. Now, one thing I forgot to do in the previous movie was to mark some additional edges. There is one here, which I have now marked, this edge, and also the same edge which is over on this side, this edge. So I've now marked those as sharp, and you'll notice that our object does have an edge split modifier applied with the sharp edges checkbox ticked. We added that by just choosing add modifier edge split. So now we've marked all the sharp edges in this model, and the next thing I want to do is to apply the appropriate rotation for this mesh. So I'm going to open up the properties panel here, scroll up to the rotation section, and for the X rotation it's going to be -90, and for the Y rotation also -90, and I'm going to apply those changes by choosing Object, Apply and Rotation to bake in that rotation. Now with this object selected, like so, here it is, selected, I'm going to choose File, Export, Autodesk, FBX, and I'm just going to export this piece as the straight section. So I'm going to call this straight section 01 perhaps, because we have several straight sections. I'm going to scroll down, make sure that selected objects is enabled. The scale should be 1. We should have Y forward, Z up, mesh selected, and apply modifiers checked, and everything else below here should be deactivated because our object contains no animation data. So I'm going to leave those settings as they are and choose Export FBX, and that object has now been exported to an FBX file. So with that said, I'm going to jump over to Unity and import this piece along with the associated texture, and we'll see how that looks. So here in Unity, I'm now ready to import the first piece for our modular environment. So I'm going to bring in a Windows Explorer window, and you can see here we've got the straight edge section that I have exported. So I'm going to drag and drop that into Unity. Let's just minimize the Windows Explorer window. And here we have that straight section, and you can see from the shaded display that those normals are now looking correct. We have those sharp edges taking effect. It's imported at a scale factor of 1, and it's also imported a default material that is associated with that model. Now I'm going to also create a new folder, create and folder, and I'm going to name this texture, which is where I'm going to import the texture file. Let's bring in a Windows Explorer window. Here is the texture that we have created in the earlier part of this course. So I'm going to drag and drop that into Unity as well. You can see that has been imported. Notice that the default size here is 1024, but I'm going to change that to 4096 and then just click Apply. Wait for that to take effect. Now if you're exporting your project to mobile platforms, you would typically use a texture size that is smaller than that, perhaps 1024 or 2048. So I'm just going to leave it for now for 4096 because we can use that for desktop platforms. I'm going to move back to the materials folder and select the mod.env material that has been imported, and for the texture swatch here I'm going to select the texture that we've imported and go back over here to our assets, and you can see we've got our modular asset here, and in the preview window it has that texture applied. I'm going to drag and drop that into the viewport, and there we can see we've got our texture applied to our model, and everything here is looking pretty good. So our model has been imported successfully and we have the texture applied. What I'm going to do now off screen is export all the rest of the modular environment assets in this way, and then we'll be ready to import them all into Unity and get started at constructing a level. So off screen in Blender, I've gone ahead and imported all of the environment pieces to FBX files and imported them into Unity. And you can see them listed here in the meshes folder in the project panel. So we have from left to right, we have the corner section, which is an inward turn. We have the outward corner section for outward turns. We have a crate prop that you can see here. We have a floor piece, and we have a second floor piece, and 3 straight sections, slightly different from one another. We have a tank prop here, and 2 trim pieces that could be aligned to the bottom of the floor to create a kind of nice finish for games that are isometric and we don't want to see the backs of walls. I'm not going to be using these 2 pieces in this course, however, but they are there if you wish to use them. Now, of course, to create a level from these pieces, we could just start dragging and dropping pieces into the scene. For example, I could drag and drop this floor piece here and then a wall section for the edge piece, and we can align them using Vertex Snapping. Let me just quickly show you how that works. I'm going to maximize this viewport by pressing the space bar, and I will, for example, select this wall piece and I want to align it to the floor here. To do that, make sure the translate tool is selected here, and I'm going to press and hold the V key on the keyboard to enable Vertex Snapping. And I'm going to select this corner vertex on the floor and just click and drag to align that to this floor piece. So now these are aligned quite nicely together. And in this way, using Vertex Snapping, you can build up a completely seamless level. However, we can also use prefabs to make our work easier. So I'm going to delete both of these pieces, and let me show you how we will work with prefabs. Now I know that, for example, our level is going to need a dead end section. We might have a corridor section, and at the end of the corridor we'll have a dead end. Now I'm going to create that dead end using two of these corner pieces. So I'm going to drag and drop this corner piece over here, for example, like so. And I'm just going to align that to the world origin, for example. So there it is, looking pretty good. And I'm going to duplicate this piece by pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard and invert the scale to -1. And there we have these two pieces aligned together, and well, that's looking fine. That creates a dead end section. Next, I'm going to create a new game object by choosing Game Object Create Empty, and I'm going to set the position of this to the world origin as well, and name this game object Dead End. And then I'll move out here to the Assets folder. Before I do that, actually, I'm going to select both these corner pieces and make them children of the dead end section so that we group them under the dead end section like so. And then I'll create a new folder to contain our prefabs by right clicking, choosing Create and choosing Folder, and I'll name this Prefabs like so, and press Enter on the keyboard. Let's open up the Prefabs folder and create a new prefab by right clicking here, choosing Create, and I'm going to select Prefab, and I'll name this prefab Dead End like so. I'm going to select this dead end piece here and drag and drop it into the prefab. And when I select the prefab, you'll see in the preview panel that really we don't get a good view of our mesh here. But when we drag and drop that into the scene, it's going to look fine. So I'm just going to select this dead end piece, delete it from the scene. And now we have this dead end prefab. And every time I drag and drop this into the level, we get instances of this dead end section. And we don't need to arrange these two pieces every single time. So that's going to make our work a lot easier, and what I'm going to do next is really create some more prefab pieces like this to save us a lot of work. So now let's create some more prefabs that we're going to be able to use for our level. So I'm going to move over to the meshes group here, and I think what I'll do is I'll create a corridor section first. So let's drag in a straight piece here. And I'm going to align that once again to the world origin and just zoom in here. And I'm going to drag in maybe this section here and rotate that perhaps 180 degrees on the x-axis, on the y-axis, beg your pardon, and just align that to the origin. And so now we have a straight section with these two pieces aligned together, and that's looking okay. So I'm going to select this section and this section. Actually, we're going to parent these to a new game object. So I'm going to choose Game Object Create Empty, and again I'm going to align that to the world origin and name this Straight Section 01, and select both of these pieces and just drag them, drop them into that straight section. Move over to the Prefabs group, right click, choose Create and select Prefab, and I'm just going to call this Straight Section 01 and just drag and drop that into this prefab, and now we have a straight section prefab. I might go ahead off screen and create more straight sections like that. That's looking pretty good. So I could just, for example, delete this, and every time now we wanted a straight section, I can just drag and drop that into the level. And the great thing about this is that we can still use vertex snapping. So I can hold down the V key, select that vertex and snap that straight section to here, and we've got a straight section that looks pretty good. Two of them aligned together, so that's fine. So I'm going to delete both of these for now because I want to create another prefab. The prefab I want to create this time, I think I'm going to create, maybe if we go back to meshes, I think I'm going to create one of these outward turn pieces. So I'm going to drag and drop this corner outward turn here and align this to the origin again. So we've got this outward turn piece, and I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard, and I'm going to again apply negative scale to this so it goes to the other side, and we have these two sections here. I'm going to now just select another straight section piece, perhaps this piece, and rotate this 90 degrees on the x-axis, and I'm going to use Vertex Snapping to align this nicely with this piece here. Let's just drag in another piece over here, and again I'm going to use negative 90 degrees on the y-axis and use Vertex Snapping. So hold down the V key, click and drag it to here, and then we've created the outward turn into this section, but of course we need another straight section over here. So I'm going to click and drag this piece, rotate it 180 on the y-axis, and hold down the V key on the keyboard to vertex snap that in place. I'm going to add another one of these, again 180 degrees on the y-axis, and back to the trusted vertex snapping to snap that in place. And there, in doing that, we've created a complete outward turn that's going to be very useful. So again, we want to create the prefab, so I'm going to choose Game Object, Create Empty, align this again to the world origin, and I'm going to name this T section, and I'm going to put 01 at the end in case we want to create any more T sections. So I'm going to select this piece and all of these pieces except for the camera, of course, we don't want that in the prefab. Drag and drop it to T section like so. Again, move to the prefabs folder, right click, choose Create, select prefab, and I'm going to call this T section 01, and drag and drop that mesh into this prefab, and there now we have a T section prefab that we can drag and drop and use as many times as we want. So in that way, I'm going to go ahead off screen now and create some more prefabs that we can use to really put together a complete environment.